The crack of gunfire shattered the morning calm as Tamara Valens ducked behind the empty water trough, her calloused hands clutching the heavy oak bucket she'd been carrying from the well. Another day in Promise Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1878, another reminder that a woman alone was prey to every vulture with a bottle of whiskey and a grudge against the world. "Miss Tamara, get inside," Sheriff Bailey shouted from across the dusty street where he crouched behind a hitching post, his revolver drawn. Tamara didn't need to be told twice. At 24, she'd survived 5 years of running her father's farm alone after influenza claimed both her parents within days of each other. She knew when to fight and when to flee. She abandoned the bucket and scrambled toward the general store, the closest building with a sturdy door. The commotion turned out to be nothing more than a drunken cattle driver shooting at shadows, but it left Tamara shaken as she dusted off her simple blue work dress. Inside Holloway's general store, several women from town were gathered, clutching parcels and whispering behind gloved hands. "Well, if it isn't the farmer girl," remarked Eliza Peterson, the banker's wife, with a voice like honey laced with arsenic. "Come to town for supplies or to find a husband? Though with hands like those, I'm not sure which would be harder to obtain." The other women tittered as Tamara unconsciously tucked her hands into the folds of her skirt. Years of plowing, planting, harvesting, and mending had left her once delicate hands rough and calloused, with short, practical nails and skin tanned by the relentless Wyoming sun. "Some of us work for our living, Mrs. Peterson," Tamara replied quietly, keeping her voice steady despite the familiar ache of humiliation. "Not all of us can afford the luxury of idleness." Mrs. Peterson's face hardened. "There's work, and then there's a woman knowing her place. No man wants to be touched by hands that feel like saddle leather." Before Tamara could respond, the store's bell jangled as the door swung open. A tall figure filled the doorway, silhouetted against the bright morning light. As he stepped inside, removing his wide-brimmed hat, Tamara found herself looking at a stranger unusual in a town as small as Promise Creek. His features were chiseled and weathered, with eyes the color of a summer storm and hair the rich brown of freshly turned earth. His clothes were trail-worn but clean: denim pants, a simple blue shirt, leather vest, and boots that had clearly seen many miles. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the revolver worn but well-maintained. "Ladies," he nodded politely before approaching the counter, where Mr. Holloway waited. "Help you, stranger?" the shopkeeper asked, one hand drifting beneath the counter where Tamara knew he kept a shotgun. "Name's Wade Northrup. Looking for supplies and maybe information," the stranger replied, his voice deep and measured with the faintest hint of a southern drawl. Eliza Peterson immediately shifted her attention from Tamara to the newcomer, her predatory smile returning. "You're new to Promise Creek, Mr. Northrup?" "Just passing through." Wade Northrup glanced at her briefly.
"No, madam.
"I've purchased the old Thornton place outside town. Planning to raise horses." This announcement caused a flurry of whispers. The Thornton ranch had been abandoned for nearly 2 years after Old Man Thornton died without heirs. It was good grazing land with a reliable creek, but the buildings had fallen into disrepair. "Quite an undertaking for one man," Mrs. Peterson remarked, moving closer. "You'll need help, I imagine." "I'm used to hard work," Wade replied simply, turning back to Mr. Holloway to continue discussing his supply needs. Tamara took the opportunity to slip around the gossiping women and approach the counter to place her own modest order. As she reached for her list, her roughened fingers brushed against Wade's hand. She quickly withdrew, remembering Mrs. Peterson's cruel words. "Sorry," she murmured, keeping her eyes down. Wade studied her for a moment. "No harm done," he said, then stepped aside to let her conduct her business. Mr. Holloway smiled warmly at Tamara. "The usual, Miss Valens? Flour, coffee, sugar, and nails?" "Yes, and some kerosene for the lamps, please," she replied, reaching into her pocket for the carefully counted coins. As Mr. Holloway gathered her items, Mrs. Peterson couldn't resist another barb. My goodness, Tamara. You really should invest in some good gloves. Those hands of yours look positively masculine. What would your poor mother say if she could see them now? Tamara stiffened, the mention of her mother landing like a physical blow. Before she could respond, Wade Northrup spoke, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the now silent door. Where I come from, madam, a woman's hands tell her story. Soft hands mean she's never had to fight for anything. Calloused hands mean she's survived. He turned to Tamara, nodding slightly. Those are hands that can build a life, miss. Nothing to be ashamed of there. The store fell silent. Mrs. Peterson's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for water before she gathered her dignity and her packages, sweeping toward the door with her companions in tow. Tamara felt heat rising to her cheeks as she accepted her parcels from Mr. Holloway. Thank you, she said to Wade, her voice barely above a whisper. Just speaking the truth, he replied with a slight shrug. I need someone who knows farming to show me around the Thornton place. The land agent in Cheyenne wasn't particularly helpful. Would you be willing? The question caught Tamara off guard. Me? You look like someone who knows this land, he said simply. I'd pay for your time, of course. Tamara hesitated. Money was always tight, and the farm consumed every moment of her day. But an extra few dollars could make the difference between barely surviving and actually getting ahead. I could spare tomorrow afternoon, she finally said. After midday. I'm Tamara Valens. My farm is about 3 miles east of the Thornton place. Wade nodded. I'll come by around 1 then, if that suits. It does, she replied, gathering her packages. As she turned to leave, she felt strangely lighter, as though something long knotted inside her had begun to loosen. The next day, Tamara worked through her morning chores with unusual efficiency. She fed the chickens, collected eggs, milked her 2 cows, mended a broken fence rail, and was just finishing her simple midday meal when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Wade Northrup rode a magnificent bay stallion that pranced nervously in the yard. He dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. Miss Valens, he greeted her, hat in hand. Your place looks well tended. Tamara glanced around at the small but neat farm, the weathered but solid house her father had built, the well-maintained barn, the orderly rows of vegetables in the kitchen garden. Thank you. It's not much, but it's mine. Or will be, once I finish paying the bank. You work this alone? He asked, surveying the 20 acres of cultivated fields beyond the house. Since my parents died, yes. She brushed her hands against her skirt, suddenly self-conscious of her appearance. She'd changed into her second-best dress, a faded green calico, but there'd been no time to do anything with her chestnut hair beyond tying it back with a ribbon. That's impressive, Wade said, and something in his tone made her believe he meant it. They rode to the Thornton property side by side, Tamara on her sturdy mare. Along the way, she pointed out landmarks and shared what she knew of the soil conditions and weather patterns in the area. Winters are harsh here, she warned. You'll need good shelter for those horses you plan to raise. That's why I'm looking to get started on repairs right away, Wade replied. The main house is sound enough, but the barn needs work before fall. When they reached the Thornton place, Tamara could see that needs work was an understatement. The once grand barn sagged precariously, its roof partially collapsed. The corral fences were broken in several places, and the windmill that pumped water from the deep well was missing several blades. You've got your work cut out for you, she remarked as they dismounted. Wade nodded grimly. Appears the land agent in Cheyenne was even less honest than I suspected. Still, the water's good, and the grazing land is what I need. They spent the next 2 hours walking the property. Tamara showed him which slopes would flood in spring, which would hold snow the longest in winter, and where the best natural shelter was for the horses. Wade listened attentively, occasionally making notes in a small book he carried. As the afternoon light began to fade, they returned to the house, a two-story structure in better shape than the outbuildings, but still showing years of neglect. "Would you like some coffee before you head back?" Wade asked. "It's the least I can offer for your help." Tamara hesitated, acutely aware of propriety. A single woman visiting a bachelor's home would set tongues wagging in Promise Creek. But they were miles from town, and honestly, she was tired of caring what people like Eliza Peterson thought. "Coffee would be nice," she said. Inside, the house was sparsely furnished with pieces that looked hastily acquired: a rough wooden table, two mismatched chairs, a cot in what was once the parlor. "It's not much yet," Wade acknowledged, setting water to boil on the iron stove. "But it'll do until I get settled." "Where are you from originally?" Tamara asked, sitting at the table while Wade prepared the coffee. "Kentucky, originally," he replied. "Then Texas after the war. Ran cattle for a while, then started breaking horses for the army." "That's quite a journey to Wyoming." Wade's expression tightened momentarily. Needed a change. Some places hold too many memories. The way he said it made Tamara curious, but she recognized the shadow that crossed his face, the same one she sometimes saw in her own mirror on the anniversaries of her parents' deaths. "I understand that," she said softly. Wade brought 2 tin cups of coffee to the table and sat across from her. "I imagine you do. Running a farm alone can't be easy." "It isn't," Tamara admitted, warming her hands on the cup. "But it's mine. My father built it from nothing. I can't just let it go." "Your hands tell that story," Wade said, nodding toward her fingers wrapped around the cup. Tamara instinctively started to hide them, then stopped herself. "Most people in town don't see it that way." "Most people in town probably couldn't survive a week doing what you do," Wade replied. "Those fine ladies with their soft hands and sharp tongues, they're like fancy birds in cages. Pretty to look at, but useless in a storm." The unexpected comparison startled a laugh from Tamara. "I'm not sure Mrs. Peterson would appreciate being compared to a caged canary." "Probably not," Wade agreed, a smile softening his features. "But it's true nonetheless." They talked until the coffee was gone, and the light outside had faded to purple dusk. Wade insisted on riding back with her to ensure she reached home safely. "I appreciate the tour," he said as they reached her farm. "Would you be willing to help me again? I could use advice on which trees to cut for fence posts and barn repairs." "I could spare Sunday afternoon after church," Tamara offered, surprised at how much she wanted to see him again.
"Sunday, then."
Wade tipped his hat and turned his horse back toward his own property. Over the next several weeks, Tamara found herself spending more and more time at the Thornton, now Northrup ranch. What began as occasional advice about the land evolved into Tamara helping Wade rebuild fences, repair the roof of the barn, and even breaking ground for a small kitchen garden behind the house. Wade paid her fairly for her time and knowledge, money that Tamara desperately needed. But more than that, she found herself enjoying his company. Unlike most men she'd known, Wade treated her as an equal, valuing her opinions and never once suggesting that certain tasks were men's work. One hot August afternoon, they were replacing rotted boards on the barn wall when Wade suddenly asked, "Why haven't you married, Tamara? A woman as capable as you seems like any sensible man would consider himself fortunate." Tamara nearly dropped the board she was holding. "You've seen how the respectable people in town look at me. I'm the odd woman who lives alone and does a man's work. No one sees me as a potential wife." "Their loss," Wade said simply, hammering another nail into place. The words hung in the air between them, charged with something Tamara wasn't ready to name. She cleared her throat. "What about you? You're not exactly ancient. Why no wife?" Wade was silent for so long that Tamara thought he might not answer. Finally, he set down his hammer. "There was someone back in Texas. Emily. We were engaged to be married. His voice grew tight. Fever took her 3 weeks before the wedding. I'm sorry, Tamara said softly. Wade nodded, picking up his hammer again. It was 5 years ago now. Part of why I came north. Too many ghosts in Texas. They worked in companionable silence after that, but something had shifted between them, a new understanding, a deeper connection forged through shared loss. As summer turned to fall, Tamara found herself inventing reasons to visit the Northrup ranch. Wade seemed equally inventive in finding tasks that required her expertise. They fell into an easy rhythm of work and conversation, punctuated by shared meals and occasional laughter. The first snowfall came early that year, dusting the prairies with white in mid-October. Tamara was checking her storage cellar, mentally calculating whether her food supplies would last the winter, when she heard a horse approaching through the swirling snow. Wade dismounted, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Thought you might need help battening down for the storm, he said, nodding toward the heavy gray clouds gathering on the horizon. Barometers falling fast. I was just thinking the same, Tamara replied, leading him toward the barn. The animals need extra feed, and I should reinforce the chicken coop. The fox got 3 hens last winter when the snow collapsed part of the roof. They worked quickly, Wade chopping extra firewood while Tamara secured the livestock. By the time they finished, the snow was falling in earnest, thick flakes driven by an increasingly bitter wind. You shouldn't try to ride back in this, Tamara said, watching as visibility diminished with each passing minute. The blizzard setting in. Wade hesitated, clearly aware of the impropriety of staying. I don't want to compromise your reputation. Tamara laughed, the sound almost lost in the howling wind. My reputation? Wade, according to half the town, I'm already beyond redemption for living alone and wearing trousers when I plow. His expression remained serious. All the more reason not to give them more to talk about. Let them talk, Tamara said, suddenly tired of caring what others thought. I'd rather have you alive than frozen in a snowdrift for the sake of propriety. Inside the house, Tamara built up the fire while Wade tended to his horse in her small barn. When he returned, his coat and hat were covered with snow that quickly melted in the warmth of the kitchen. You'll need dry clothes, Tamara said practically. I have some of my father's things in the trunk upstairs. They might be a bit short, but they're clean and warm. While Wade changed, Tamara prepared a simple supper of bean soup and cornbread. They ate by lamplight as the storm raged outside, rattling the windows and moaning down the chimney. This reminds me of winters back home, Wade said, helping himself to more soup. My mother used to say blizzards were just God's way of forcing folks to rest for a spell. Your mother sounds wise, Tamara replied, watching him across the table. Her father's old flannel shirt stretched across Wade's broader shoulders, and his wrists extended well beyond the cuffs, but seeing him in her father's clothes stirred something unexpected in her chest. She was, Wade agreed. Taught me to respect women who weren't afraid of hard work. Said my grandmother crossed the Cumberland Gap with calloused hands and an iron will, and that's why any of us were alive to tell the tale. Tamara smiled. I wish more people thought that way. Tamara, Wade said, his voice suddenly serious. You know I didn't just happen by today. I've been looking for a reason to see you. Her heart skipped. Have you? You must know how I feel. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. These past months, working alongside you, I've never known anyone like you. Tamara stared at their hands, his tanned and strong, hers smaller but equally work-roughened. Wade, I'm just a farmer trying to hold on to her land. I'm not like the ladies in town. Thank God for that, he said fervently. Those women with their delicate hands and empty heads, they'd wither and die out here. But you. His fingers tightened around hers. You've built something real. Something that matters. Tamara felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Most men want a wife who's soft and gentle, who doesn't argue or have opinions about crops and cattle. I'm not most men, Wade replied simply. And I don't want most women. I want you, Tamara Valens, calloused hands and all. The blizzard trapped them together for 2 days. They slept in separate rooms, Tamara in her bedroom upstairs, Wade on the sofa downstairs, but spent the daylight hours talking, playing checkers by the fire, and sharing stories of their lives before they met. When the storm finally cleared, leaving the world transformed into a glittering white landscape, Wade reluctantly prepared to leave. I need to check on my place, he explained as Tamara helped him saddle his horse. But I'll be back if you'll have me. I'll have you, she replied softly. He kissed her then, in the crystal-clear air of the winter morning, his lips warm against hers despite the cold. When they parted, his eyes were serious. I meant what I said, Tamara. I want you to be my wife. Not someday soon. Word of their blizzard confinement spread through Promise Creek like wildfire. When Tamara ventured into town the following week for supplies, she was met with cold stares and whispered comments. In Holloway's store, Eliza Peterson didn't bother to lower her voice. Well, if it isn't our local farmhand. I hear you've been entertaining the new rancher in quite an intimate fashion. Who would have thought those rough hands of yours would appeal to anyone? Tamara felt her face flame, but before she could respond, the door opened and Wade stepped inside. He crossed directly to Tamara's side, taking her hand firmly in his. Mrs. Peterson, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent store. I hope you'll be among the first to congratulate us. Miss Valens has agreed to become my wife. The shocked silence that followed was broken by Mr. Holloway's genuine, well, congratulations to you both. Eliza Peterson's face twisted in a forced smile.
How?
Unexpected. Though I suppose a man who's been alone on the frontier might have different standards. Wade's grip on Tamara's hand tightened slightly. On the contrary, Mrs. Peterson, my standards are exceptionally high. I wanted a partner, not a porcelain doll. These hands, he lifted Tamara's hand to his lips, have built a farm from nothing, kept it running through drought and blizzard, and still managed to remain the gentlest I've ever known. These are the hands that will hold me through whatever life brings. I consider myself the luckiest man in Wyoming territory. They were married 2 weeks later in the small white church in Promise Creek. Tamara wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit her taller frame. Wade wore a new suit ordered from Cheyenne. The ceremony was simple, attended by the few townsfolk who had always been kind to Tamara and several ranchers who had already formed friendships with Wade. That night, in the master bedroom of the now renovated Northrup ranch house, Tamara found herself suddenly shy as Wade gently removed the pins from her hair. You're beautiful, he murmured, watching as the chestnut waves fell past her shoulders. Even with these? She asked, holding up her work-worn hands. Wade took both her hands in his, turning them palm up. Slowly, deliberately, he kissed each calloused palm. Especially with these, he said against her skin. They're part of who you are, Tamara. And I love all of you. Spring came early the following year. The merged Valens Northrup property flourished under their combined care. Wade's horses gained a reputation for quality throughout the territory, while Tamara's expanded vegetable gardens produced enough to sell the surplus in town. By summer, Tamara's dresses needed letting out to accommodate the gentle swell of her belly. A child, Wade said in wonder, his hand resting on the curve where their baby grew. Our child. I hope he is your eyes, Tamara replied, placing her hand over his. And your hands, Wade countered. Strong hands. Hands that build and nurture. In town, attitudes had gradually shifted. Eliza Peterson and her circle still sniffed disapprovingly when Tamara appeared in practical boots rather than dainty slippers, but others had begun to look at her differently with respect rather than pity or disdain. One afternoon in late August, Tamara was selecting fabric in the general store when a young woman approached her timidly. She recognized Clara Bennett, recently arrived from back east to marry a local rancher. "Mrs. Northrup," Clara said hesitantly, "I was wondering if— That is, I heard you know about vegetable gardens. Our plot isn't producing well, and I thought perhaps you'd like some advice?" Tamara finished for her, smiling. Clara nodded, holding up her own hands once soft and white, now beginning to show the redness and roughness of ranch work. "William tries to help, but he's busy with the cattle. I want to contribute, but I don't know what I'm doing wrong." "I'd be happy to visit and take a look," Tamara offered. "Perhaps next Tuesday?" Relief flooded Clara's face. "Thank you. The other ladies in town. They keep suggesting I hire help, but we can't afford it yet." "Don't worry about them," Tamara said, unconsciously echoing Wade's words from their first meeting. "Soft hands mean you've never had to fight for anything. You're fighting to build a life with your husband. That's something to be proud of." Clara's expression brightened. "My mother would be horrified. She spent years teaching me to keep my hands soft and white. She said no gentleman would want to be touched by rough hands." Tamara thought of Wade, of his unfailing appreciation for her strength and capability, of the way he still kissed her palms each night before they slept. "The right man," she said gently, "will value what those hands can do far more than how they look. The right man will understand that these marks are badges of courage, not flaws to be hidden." That evening, as Tamara and Wade sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the prairie gold, she told him about her conversation with Clara. "You've become quite the philosopher," he teased, his arm around her shoulders. "I had a good teacher," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Someone who saw value where others saw only flaws." Wade's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining, his sun-browned and strong, hers smaller but equally capable. "Not flaws," he corrected. "Character. The story of a life well lived." As darkness settled over the land they'd built together, Tamara thought of the journey that had brought her here from a lonely young woman fighting to survive to a wife, soon-to-be mother and respected member of the community. "I never thought I'd find this," she admitted quietly. "A partner who truly sees me." "I saw you from that first day in the store," Wade replied, standing tall despite their mockery. "Those women with their soft hands and brittle hearts could never understand what true strength looks like." Tamara smiled, remembering. "Those hands will hold me," she quoted softly. "Always," Wade promised, his lips brushing her temple. "Through whatever comes, Tamara. Always." Their child was born as winter's first snow dusted the prairie, a daughter with Wade's storm-gray eyes and what the midwife declared would surely be Tamara's determined spirit. They named her Hope, for what they had found in each other when both believed such feelings might never be theirs again. And when spring returned once more to Wyoming, Tamara Northrup planted her garden with her daughter sleeping nearby and her husband building a new corral for the season's foals. Her hands, still calloused, still strong, worked the soil with practiced ease, no longer a source of shame but a testament to the life she had fought for and won. In Promise Creek, they still sometimes whispered about the farmer's daughter who had won the handsome horse rancher despite her rough ways. But increasingly, the younger women of the territory looked to Tamara with admiration rather than judgment, seeing in her a different kind of feminine strength, one forged in the crucible of the frontier, where survival demanded more than a pretty face and delicate manners. And at night, when the work was done and the house grew quiet, Wade still held those hard-working hands in his, tracing each callus and scar with reverence, reminding Tamara with each touch that true love sees beyond the surface to the strength and beauty that lies beneath.